Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here, as always, is pretty simple. We take these really complex strategic sources, right? The white papers, the research that's, shaping our future, and we try to distill it all down. We want to give you the knowledge you need to be informed and to do it fast. And today, we are undertaking a deep dive into some truly high-stakes material. We've got a strategic white paper here, and it's not arguing for, minor adjustments to military planning. It's arguing for a complete foundational revolution in how alliance land forces manage their logistics and their entire force structure. This is pretty radical stuff.
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, this paper, it really represents what you call a generational shift in thinking.
A generational shift.
For centuries, military logistics, it's all been this fort-to-port model.
Right, fort to port.
Everything just flows from a secure base, a port, into the theater. And it's all controlled, totally controlled, by the organizing power. This paper says that entire model is obsolete, that we have to pivot completely toward what they're calling the factory-to-field approach.
Factory-to-field.
It's aggressive, and it's definitely going to be expensive in the near term, but the authors, they frame it as absolutely essential for the strategic survival of any forward-deployed forces.
Okay, let's unpack that. That's a huge claim. So the central mission for you, our listener today, is really critical. How can a modern land force maintain the sheer lethality, the constant mobility it needs to operate on what they call a hyper-lethal battlefield?
And that's a battlefield just saturated with inexpensive sensors, precision fires everywhere.
Exactly. And how do you do that while at the same time slashing the massive financial costs and reducing this devastating high-signature vulnerability that comes with all those traditional static support structures?
It's a huge problem. And the answer the paper proposes, it hinges on leveraging a single, often underutilized core mechanism that's actually already in place between allies. The entire framework really relies on maximizing the acquisition and cross-servicing agreement, or ACSA.
ACSA. Okay, let's make sure we define that really clearly because it sounds like it's the legal backbone of this whole proposed revolution. Many of you listening may have heard the term, but fundamentally, what is it?
Simply put, ACSA is a bilateral legal agreement. It's established between the U.S. and over 100 partner nations.
Over 100. Wow.
Yeah, primarily NATO and other close regional allies.
Yeah.
And its whole function is to facilitate the exchange of logistics, support, supplies, services.
Things like food, fuel?
Food, fuel, spare parts, transportation, ammunition, you name it. And it does all this without the need for immediate, complex financial transfers. It's the mechanism that lets allies rapidly support each other's missions on the fly.
And the key transactional mechanism ACSA allows for, which you're saying is so critical to this white paper, is often done through something called payment in kind. Can you walk us through what that actually means in practice on the ground?
Sure. So payment in kind just means the material moves immediately. The tanks get the fuel now. The financial reconciliation that's delayed and it's simplified. It's really an accounting mechanism, not a procurement one.
Okay, so give me an example.
All right. Let's say your fighting vehicle runs low on fuel in Poland. The Polish military has excess NATO standard fuel right there. Under ACSA, they provide it to you instantly. You don't hand over a credit card. You don't wait for a treasury wire transfer to clear.
So no bureaucracy?
Zero. Instead, the U.S. might, later on compensate Poland by providing some communications equipment or maybe some specialized maintenance services or perhaps fuel of the same value in a totally different theater where they need it. This immediacy. That's the entire point. It keeps the material moving without that bureaucratic friction.
That mechanism, that ability to just bypass all the financial friction, that must be what enables the paper to introduce its core and, frankly, deeply unsettling strategic premise. It states flatly that we've reached a point of absolute conflict between political necessity and military reality.
That's it, precisely. The political necessity is to hold territory, right? To maintain conventional front lines and occupy strategic positions. That's the fundamental mission of land power for most nations.
It always has been.
But that mission now conflicts violently with the military reality. And that reality is that the lethality of the modern battlefield renders static positions obsolete. The ability of modern systems, from cheap drones to long-range artillery, to pinpoint and destroy any fixed target, means that the traditional concept of holding ground basically guarantees destruction.
That is a tectonic shift in military thinking, and it leads to the paper's absolute dictum for the modern military, which is, it's chillingly simple. It's to stop is to die.
That's the takeaway.
So if your kinetic survival now depends on continuous motion, then the entire structure that supports that military has to be rebuilt around speed and dispersion. And that, right there, is our jump-off point for this deep dive. Okay, let's dive immediately into the core reasons why this radical change is necessary right now. The paper details two major interconnected challenges facing alliance forces that make the current system, particularly the US-led system, just completely unsustainable. We've already established the first one, the strategic paradox. That tension between constant, necessary lethality, which demands movement, versus the political demand for stability, which requires holding fixed terrain.
And that tension is already crippling operations. It's happening right now. But the second challenge is the really insidious driver of the current logistics failure. And the paper calls it the control paradox.
The control paradox.
And this is a distinctly American military problem. It's historically rooted in our overwhelming financial superiority. The U.S. military has always had the financial ability, and therefore the institutional desire, to pay for total organic control over every single aspect of its supply chain.
Okay, so what you're saying is we pay a massive premium to ensure that if a single bolt needs tightening on a specific vehicle in some remote outpost, a U.S. vetted contractor managed by a U.S. contracting officer delivers a U.S. procured bolt. It's about total organic ownership of the risk.
Exactly. And the result of that desire for absolute control is this massive, incredibly costly, and now critically high signature support system that is just ballooned into the single biggest target on the modern battlefield.
So we've optimized for oversight and control,
Right.
and in doing so, we've accidentally destroyed our resilience and our speed.
That's the paradox.
Yeah.
And the consequence of trying to solve that first strategic paradox with this existing broken structure is what the paper identifies as an obsolescence milestone for traditional land power.
An obsolescence milestone. That sounds final.
It's the point of strategic failure. Traditional military models, they rely on a homogeneous force structure. Heavy, fixed formations that are designed to maneuver quickly and sustain the holding mission at the same time.
Doing both at once.
Yes, and the paper just argues this is fundamentally impossible now. The required speed for your maneuver is completely negated by the massive logistical footprint you need to sustain a fixed position. The old model just fundamentally fails to adapt to this new reality of ubiquitous, hyperlethal precision fires.
So by forcing one type of unit, let's say a brigade combat team, to be a jack of all trades, trying to maintain both maneuver speed and fixed position sustainment, you actually end up with a force that is too heavy to maneuver effectively and way too visible to hold ground safely.
That is the core of the problem.
Yeah.
This desire for total organic control, it generates these significant mission opportunity costs. And we're not just measuring these costs in dollars, but in lost time and increased vulnerability. The white paper, it systematically breaks these costs down into three distinct escalating problems.
All right, let's go through them. Let's start with the one that illustrates the paralyzing inertia, the contracting backlog.
This is a textbook example of bureaucracy just throttling warfighting capability. The sheer scale of externalizing all of your logistics management it's overwhelming. To maintain a standard effective span of control, which in logistics might be a 3-to-1 or maybe a 5-to-1 ratio.
Meaning one supervisor for every 3 to 5 units or vendors?
Exactly. That becomes logistically and financially impossible when you are managing literally hundreds of thousands of individual contracts across the globe.
Hundreds of thousands of active contracts for everything from, local laundry services to specialized repair parts for a missile system. I can't even begin to imagine the required administrative and auditing footprint for that.
And think about the mission opportunity cost there. Every single one of those contracts requires oversight, auditing, a risk premium assessment, insurance, and you have to manage the vendor's profit margins. The paper contends that this backlog creates logistics systems that are simply too slow. Too slow to field and incorporate modern weapons or to rapidly support high-tempo mobile operations. Imagine you need a specific counter-drone jammer system delivered to a forward unit, right?
A critical, urgent need.
Absolutely. But because that system and its sustainment contract have to navigate this global bureaucracy, months can pass. And that completely undermines the combat unit's speed advantage.
So inertia is the first killer. The second you said is visibility. They label this the signature problem. This is about the inherent vulnerability of relying on these bespoke American facilities that are designed for our total control.
Right. And when we talk about signature, we mean anything that makes a facility detectable. It could be thermal, electromagnetic, just as physical size, or even the predictable routines of life there. A
Oh.
traditional U.S. military motor pool, or a vast supply warehouse, a logistical transshipment hub. These are massive, they're fixed, and they are designed explicitly for a large American scale.
They stick out.
They stick out like a sore thumb. And the paper notes that these bespoke facilities are no longer just targets. They are guaranteed massive liabilities.
Because we're well past the era where you needed expensive, dedicated military reconnaissance or satellites to find these fixed locations.
We are squarely in the age of ubiquitous, inexpensive sensors. Commercial satellite imagery with pretty impressive resolution is available to almost anyone now. And what's more, inexpensive drone warfare, loitering munitions, the exponential growth of signal intelligence, all of that means that a fixed battalion combat outpost is no longer a stronghold.
Not at all.
Its power signature, its waste disposal routine, its communication patterns, its physical size. All of it makes it instantly detectable and tractable. It is, in the paper's very stark language, a magnet for destruction. The enemy knows that if your mobile fighting force is tethered to that fixed logistical anchor, they just have to hit the anchor over and over and over again.
That certainty of targeting fixed positions brings us to the third, and I think the most evocative analogy the paper uses. It's borrowed from the maritime domain, the landship paradox.
This is where the whole strategic argument just crystallizes. Naval commanders have understood this for a long, long time. A ship at sea, if it stops or if it loses power, it immediately ceases being a fighting platform. Instantly, it transitions into a survival scenario. It's just a vulnerable hull in the water waiting to be hit. And the white paper argues that this exact same tactical reality has now fully migrated to the land domain.
Meaning that if a tank or a forward resupply point or even a fighting position stops moving, maybe to refuel or to wait for a contracting officer to approve a repair or to receive a delivery via one of those vulnerable paved main supply routes, an MSR, it immediately becomes combat ineffective and enters the highest possible risk scenario.
The precision and the speed of modern fires mean that the moment a vehicle loses its kinetic energy, the moment it stops moving, its thermal signature is analyzed, it's targeted, and it's struck. Therefore, the inescapable conclusion that you derive from the landship paradox is profound. Survivability must cease to be a function of static occupation or fortification or even armor thickness. It must instead become entirely a function of constant movement and dispersion.
To pause is to invite destruction. And that is the ultimate indictment of the current logistical system, isn't it? It's fundamentally designed to serve these fixed hubs. So if the goal is kinetic survival through movement, the entire logistics tail has to be instantly responsive, decentralized, and low signature. That's the gap this ACSA-First idea is trying to fill. Okay, so the current system is too slow, too expensive, and far too visible. The solution proposed in this paper is to fundamentally implement the ACSA-First framework. This enables a necessary functional specialization of the land component into two distinct commands. This is about detangling the fighting force from the holding force and using alliance resources, not just our own organic assets, to supply the fighters.
And this entire transition is made possible by what the paper calls the factory-to-field material shift. And that's characterized by three things: radical speed, inherent modularity, and the creation of a truly circular economy across allied nations.
Okay, let's expand on that circular economy, the one enabled by ACSA's payment in kind. How does that fundamentally alter the flow of material?
It basically replaces a linear, single-source pipeline with a complex, distributed network. Under the traditional model, material flows only one way, from the factory in the continental United States, or CONUS.
And CONUS here, for our listeners, just refers to the logistical base within the mainland United States, which, when you are fighting in Europe or Asia, is thousands of miles and weeks of time away.
Exactly. That old pipeline goes from CONUS, often through slow sea lanes, to the port and then into the field. The whole process is inherently bottlenecked by distance, by required congressional appropriations, and just the slow pace of shipbuilding and cargo handling.
Right. And the ACSA for circular economy, what does that look like instead?
It means resources flow where they're needed immediately, regardless of where the funding came from. A theater that's currently at peace, say a major European partner, can instantly supply essential fuel or maintenance parts, or even specialized engineering expertise to a theater that is at war.
And the transaction is just logged.
It's authorized, it's executed, and the accounting reconciliation, that payment in kind, it happens later. This bypasses the entire slow, risk-averse CONUS procurement pipeline, allowing allies to instantly fill each other's logistical gaps.
So the critical advantage is speed. It has to be. If you have to wait for material to cross an ocean and clear customs, your mobile forces, well, it's dead in the water. Or on the land, rather.
Speed is survival. The source material is very emphatic about this. Material overmatch is achieved only by pulling material from local partner stocks. You're using the existing pre-positioned and locally understood logistics base of the host nation rather than waiting for that sluggish intercontinental factory pipeline. This speed is what maintains the momentum required for that kinetic survival we were just talking about.
And this inherent speed, it must demand a level of modularity that land forces have historically really resisted, right? You can't be tethered to one specific supply depot if you're suddenly relying on 5 different allied nations for parts and fuel.
You are absolutely correct. And the paper, once again, it turns to naval thinking. It compares land battalions to a destroyer squadron, a desron.
And a Desron.
In the Navy, a desron is a modular, flexible command unit. They can instantly transfer operational control to different task forces based on the immediate threat. Today they're screening a carrier, tomorrow they're tasked with surface combat. Land battalions need that same flexibility. The paper says they must operate as a land desron, able to switch commands, missions, and crucially, supply lines instantly, based on the tactical requirement, not based on some fixed peacetime administrative unit hierarchy.
So if a unit finishes its kinetic fight, the maneuver mission, and it needs to transition to a holding or a stability mission, its logistical requirements change instantly. It goes from needing specialist kinetic supplies to bulk stability assets. And that change is facilitated not by some new contract, but by an immediate switch in its ACSA partner support.
Precisely. And this distributed mobile structure, it necessitates a reliance on autonomous logistics and foraging. The goal of all this specialization and speed is to give the force a foraging capability.
Let's be very clear about foraging in a modern military context. This isn't, soldiers living off the land. It means they can sustain themselves by utilizing pre-positioned local resources, whether those are allied or commercial, rather than relying on a single fixed line of supply.
That's the key distinction. The force must be able to sustain itself by accessing resources provided by autonomous resupply systems, unmanned ground vehicles, UGVs, or large aerial systems, UAS. These systems handle that dangerous last mile of logistics without risking human crews.
So the troops just put in an order?
The fighting force issues the demand, and the autonomous system routes the supply from the nearest pre-authorized ACSA node, whether that's a partner military cache or a commercial depot.
And the strategic benefit of this is crystal clear. It drastically reduces the force's reliance on those vulnerable paved main supply routes, the MSRs.
MSRs are visibility magnets. They are fixed, they're easily observed choke points, and enemy targeting doctrine absolutely relies on hitting them. Autonomous foraging allows your forces to remain dispersed, to utilize secondary, unpaved, or commercially integrated routes, and that reduces their signature so significantly that the enemy just can't reliably interdict the supply chain. If you can move your fuel off-road and underground, you break their target chain.
This all sounds like a magnificent theoretical framework, but let's talk about the practical logistics shift. The pivot away from American facilities toward existing host nation infrastructure, especially for bulk items like fuel and water. This is the part that feels truly radical to me.
It is the most challenging proposal for peacetime integration, absolutely, but it's also the most essential for resilience. The argument is simple. Why build and secure an American-only fuel depot in a foreign country when a robust, high-capacity commercial depot run by the host nation already exists a few miles away?
It seems obvious when you put it that way.
Instead of deploying U.S. fuel trucks and U.S. personnel to manage them, the military should leverage existing host nation infrastructure. Local fuel depots, local power grids, local transportation networks to essentially hide in plain sight.
And they provide that fantastic analogy for this, the Sydney-Hawaii model.
Right. It's an analogy drawn from decades of naval interoperability. An Australian frigate can pull into Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and fuel up at cost using U.S. Navy resources via ACSA. It's instantaneous, it's legally supported, and it relies on established infrastructure. The U.S. Army, this paper argues, must adopt this exact operational mindset. Instead of bringing the whole house with us, we should utilize host nation infrastructure and support grids for daily services fueling, basic maintenance, temporary warehousing.
So what are the concrete strategic benefits of this deep integration beyond just the obvious cost savings?
We can break it down into 3 huge operational and strategic gains. First, as we said, low signature. The forces become inherently harder to target because they are integrated with local civilian infrastructure. They don't present that massive, high-signature U.S. military facility profile. They just sort of disappear into the host nation's existing logistical matrix, obscuring their movements and supplies.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second one?
Second, increased competency. This is the burden-sharing benefit. If the U.S. military is structurally required to rely on partner nations for daily logistical services, fueling, transportation, maintenance, it mandates that those partner nations rapidly raise their own technical standards, their capacity, and their interoperability.
That's a crucial point for alliance resilience.
Yeah.
You are functionally relying on that partner nation for your force's immediate survival.
It means that in peacetime, the integration, the standardization, the training protocols, they all have to be meticulously high. It stops being a U.S. unilateral mission and it becomes a true integrated burden-sharing exercise where interdependence is deliberately engineered as a feature, not avoided as a bug.
Okay, so you get lower signature, higher partner competency. And the third benefit, which elevates this to a national policy level, is strategic civil defense. This is the big picture linkage.
Yes, the military logistics becomes a force multiplier for national resilience. By integrating the resilience of critical civilian infrastructure, the commercial power grid, the national transportation networks, the commercial fuel depots, directly into the military support plan, you are ensuring two things. First, obviously, the military is supported. But second, you are hardening the entire national framework to ensure the continuation of government and essential services during combat. This requires allies to make massive national investments in securing their own energy grids and transportation networks, ensuring their state can survive regardless of the military conflict.
So the U.S. military's requirement for a low-signature, decentralized supply chain creates powerful economic and security pressure for its partners to invest in their own national resilience. It makes them stronger from the ground up. It's an integrated defense model born out of necessity.
So now that the logistical anchor has been cut, via ACSA-First and this decentralized support, the land component is free to specialize. And this is where the force structure itself is entirely reorganized. The overarching goal is to optimize your human capital and drastically reduce that massive administrative and support tail footprint that currently exists.
So we are moving away from the old homogeneous force structure where every unit does a little bit of everything toward two functionally specialized commands based purely on their mission.
Precisely. The paper defines these two commands with distinct, non-overlapping roles.
Let's start with the first one, the Expeditionary Strike Force, ESF. This is the dedicated fighting force designed purely for maneuver and kinetic action.
The ESF is optimized for pure speed and mobility. They are light on logistical burden because they're expecting immediate ACSA support from wherever they are. Their defining characteristic is achieving what the paper calls transitory massing.
Transitory massing.
It's a deliberate rejection of sustained occupation. Transitory massing means achieving fleeting superiority, the ability to concentrate force precisely when and where needed, overwhelm the enemy, execute the mission.
Like a deep strike or an interdiction.
Right. And then immediately disperse again before the enemy can pinpoint their location and mass fires against them. They are modular, rapidly deployable, and purely kinetic.
And second, there's the Stability and Defense Command, SDC. This is the dedicated holding force, and they take on the burden that the ESF shed.
The SDC is structured completely differently. They are not designed for deep maneuver or kinetic overmatch. Their mission is to consolidate the gains made by the ESS, to ensure rear area security, and to manage that long-term terrain holding mission through deep integration with local governance, local police, and partner nation forces.
So they're the political and security anchor.
Exactly. They ensure stability and continuity behind the maneuvering forces. They have a much lower operational tempo, a much higher requirement for long-term presence sustainment, which is all managed through host nation resources.
So the fighting force fights unburdened by the need to hold ground, and the holding force manages the static mission without the logistical complexity of high-speed maneuver. This functional division, it must demand a radical shift in how command authority is even exercised.
It absolutely does, because a fixed hierarchy just won't work with these modular, constantly moving land Desron units. They propose adopting the Composite Warfare Commander, CWC concept.
CWC, that's almost entirely a naval concept, isn't it? Where command authority is fluid and it's delegated by functional area like surface warfare or air defense. How in the world do you apply that to land forces?
It's a transformative application. In a traditional land army, the brigade or the division commander controls all the assets within their geographic area of operations. It's very rigid. Under CWC, authority is delegated based on function, regardless of unit hierarchy or even rank.
I mean, example of that.
Okay, so let's say the primary threat shifts instantly from enemy ground maneuver to an overwhelming enemy drone swarm attack. Under CWC, the Air Defense Commander, who might be a relatively junior officer, instantly assumes tactical mission command over all relevant assets.
Even assets belonging to a senior maneuver commander.
Even those. He or she has control until that specific air defense threat is neutralized.
That makes the command structure as fluid and responsive as the ACSA supply chain you've been describing. Units can be instantly task organized and reassigned based on the tactical function required, logistics, counterfire, maneuver, without waiting for a slow, bureaucratic transfer of authority up and down the chain.
It creates control without centralization, and it ensures that the specialized ESF units can maintain their speed and dispersion because they are linked to a flexible command system that mirrors the fluidity of their new supply architecture.
Now, let's get to the financial arguments, because this is where the paper makes its strongest case for cost reduction and efficiency. The white paper provides a table detailing the sheer resort efficiency gains of this ACSA-First model. For our audience, especially those interested in efficiency and systems change, this comparison between the current contract-heavy model and the proposed ACSA-First model is probably the most vital data point in the whole paper.
Let's walk through this analysis step by step. We can start with the administrative load and the span of control.
Okay. In the current contract-heavy model, the span of control is inherently massive. I mean, it requires centralized U.S. oversight over every single vendor, every piece of outsourced maintenance, every financial transaction, all the associated security clearances. This means hundreds, if not thousands, of U.S. military and civilian personnel dedicated solely to administrative and auditing tasks.
Right. Now, under the ACSA-First model, the span of control is dramatically reduced to small and specialized. And you have to ask, why? Because the logistics oversight is delegated to the host nation. The U.S. is simply verifying the receipt of services and materials, not auditing the execution of the service. You are relying on the partner military's own processes, and that dramatically cuts the required U.S. administrative footprint.
That reduction in the oversight footprint leads directly to the core financial difference, the cost basis. This is where the astronomical savings potential lies, I assume.
It truly is. Under the current contract-heavy model, your cost basis is the market rate plus a mandatory risk premium plus contractor profit. We are essentially paying civilian companies to operate in a war zone.
Which means they build in massive costs for insurance, security, hazard pay.
And profit margins, all funded by the U.S. taxpayer. If the market rate for a gallon of fuel is, say, $5, we might be paying $15 because of all the added risk and profit.
And that risk premium is built into every single commodity, every mile driven by a truck, and every single repair made. It's an inherent multiplier on the cost of war.
Now, contrast that with the ACSA-First model. The cost basis is simplified down to the simple at-cost purchase price. When the Polish military provides fuel to the U.S. under ACSA, they charge the U.S. what it costs them to procure or refine that fuel.
You cut out all the profit margins.
And you eliminate the U.S.-paid risk premium and the insurance overhead entirely. The savings potential on bulk items over a long campaign, it moves from millions to potentially billions of dollars.
Okay, next, let's look at personnel, which is both a financial issue and a force protection issue.
The current model requires a massive U.S. support footprint. You need U.S. contracting officers, civilian contractor management, military security teams to protect those contractors and their facilities, and extensive financial auditors. All these people are a high-signature target. The ACSA-First model replaces this with local, national, or partner military personnel. You're leveraging local expertise people who know the ground, the suppliers, the language, and crucially, you're reducing the number of U.S. personnel in vulnerable fixed rear area positions.
And this directly impacts the signature of the operation, completing the circle right back to the landship paradox.
Yes. The current model relies on high signature facilities, those bespoke American bases. They have to be visible for U.S. oversight, which makes them easy targets. The ACSA-First model generates a low signature by demanding that forces operate while hiding in plain sight, using existing civilian and partner military infrastructure that's already integrated into the local background noise.
And finally, the command structure shifts, as we discussed, from organic, a fixed chain of command, to modular, task organized, enabled by that CWC concept. It really is a complete structural and financial break from the past.
It is a complete revolution. But, such radical dependency on allies naturally invites some heavy
Yeah.
criticism. The paper anticipates this, and it addresses it in a really crucial section they call the sovereignty rebuttal.
Wait, isn't dependency inherently risky? I mean, how does the paper address the most critical counterargument? The risk of political dependency, where an allied government might suddenly restrict your supply access or ground support during a conflict because of political pressure? That seems like a massive gamble to take.
That is the central, and it's a legitimate strategic concern raised by critics. Dependency, and the risk of being defeated in detail by disposing your forces so much. The White Paper's rebuttal is twofold. It starts with a restatement of the new tactical reality. In the age of drone warfare, mass is a magnet for destruction. The risk of being politically dependent on an ally for your fuel is now strategically outweighed by the near certainty of being destroyed in mass if you choose the traditional path of gathering forces and building fixed, American-controlled logistical facilities. You have to choose the risk that allows you to survive the first lethal salvos of a modern war.
So, what the paper is arguing is that the dependency risk, while it's real, is a calculated survivable political risk, whereas the risk of mass destruction in a fixed logistical hub is a non-survivable tactical risk.
Exactly. And furthermore, the paper argues that ACSA-First actually mitigates the dependency risk by forcing functional burden sharing. ACSA replaces the unskilled U.S. contracting officer who is only equipped to manage contracts with a partner expert.
A partner
This
expert.
is an individual or a unit who is a resident expert in the local supply chain, the local regulations, the local infrastructure. This partner expert has a real stake in the outcome.
Which allows for genuine functional burden sharing where each member of the alliance plays to its comparative strengths. The U.S. provides the kinetic maneuver force, and the host nation provides the essential logistical and terrain-holding expertise.
And the dependence risk is mitigated because the dependence itself is based on a deliberate specialization strategy that enhances overall survival and lethality for the whole alliance. The ACSA mechanism ensures that the logistical function is never anchored to the vulnerable, slow U.S. bureaucracy, but rather linked into the robust, locally managed, and low-signature host nation grid.
This is a truly comprehensive and frankly startling strategic blueprint. Let's try to synthesize the core achievements of the ACSA-First approach. Let's focus on the desired operational outcomes for alliance forces in a hyper-lethal environment.
I think we're achieving three simultaneous non-negotiable goals that the traditional model just failed to deliver. First, lethality. The expeditionary strike force remains modular, and it achieves that necessary fleeting superiority through constant speed and motion, unburdened by a massive logistical tail.
Second, stability. The Stability and Defense Command handles the territory consolidation, manages rear area security, and ensures that deep integration with local governance. It makes sure the political mission of holding ground is still met, but it's done through a specialized, less kinetically focused force.
And critically, survival. Offensive forces survive the hyperlethal battlefield by staying below the detection threshold, by utilizing distributed ACSA-First logistics, and by negating the enemy's ability to target fixed, massed logistical centers. They break the enemy's targeting cycle.
And this isn't just theory for the future, is it? The paper concludes with a concrete path forward, moving from white paper to actual policy.
That's right. The immediate next step they recommend is a specific pilot program. They want to transform a brigade-size element into that land Desron testbed we talked about. This testbed would be forced to operate entirely supported by ACSA-First factory-to-field logistics, forcing them to integrate locally and operate without the traditional, cumbersome, high-signature U.S. support tail. The success of that pilot would prove the viability of all the financial and tactical gains.
Okay, here's where we connect this massive strategic knowledge back to you, the listener. If this logistics model becomes the standard for alliance operations, the nature of alliances and geopolitical burden sharing fundamentally changes what it even means to be an ally.
It moves way beyond simply sharing military capabilities, like, sharing a weapon platform. It mandates the integration and interdependence of national infrastructures. Think about it. If the U.S. Army relies on a partner nation's civilian fuel grid to operate, that grid becomes a military asset. Its resilience, its strategic civil defense becomes non-negotiable to the entire alliance. It completely flips the script on what defense investment truly means, forcing investments into foundational national infrastructure.
So it effectively weaponizes the local supply chain against the enemy's targeting capabilities. It's a unified, comprehensive defense model built on sheer necessity.
And that brings us to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with, building on the source material we've unpacked today. If survivability on the land battlefield is now fundamentally defined by constant motion, that landship paradox, what does this truly mean for the political and strategic concept of holding terrain in future conflicts? And maybe more importantly, how will governments justify the massive costs of maintaining an inherently vulnerable static military presence if that presence is now seen by military strategists as strategically obsolete?
That question requires a very difficult calculation for every leader tasked with national defense. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the future of logistics and the specialized land force. We'll see you next time.